Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today. Just before we get started, I'd like to do a quick tech check, make sure everything's working as it's supposed to. Simplest way of doing this, along the bottom of the screen, there should be an emoji button. Give it a click, pick your favorite, give it a few taps just so I know it's working. If you don't have that, just pop a message in the chat just to make sure everything is coming through clear. Fantastic. That's the scary part out of the way. So firstly, before we get started, I would like to say thank you. This is a new process for Enteractive trying out, and the response has been incredible. So thank you from myself and Enteractive on that. More so for those who registered and have spoke to me before. So they knew I had this accent and they still chose to join, which is quite unique. For those who don't know me, my name is Adam. For the last decade, I've specialized in retention, churn prevention, and growth across a range of industries. So telecommunications, educational software, military and defense, and for the last 4 years, my home has been the iGaming industry. Today, I'm part of a fantastic team and company here at Enteractive. And for those who are less familiar, since 2008, Enteractive has focused on helping operators overcome churn, focus on retention, but doing so via a human-led approach, moving away from digital channels and having real conversations with people over the phone. We help to boost LTV, we help to improve retention rates, most importantly, we help to build trust. Today, that makes us the industry leaders in retention and reactivation, and we do this for some of the most amazing names in the industry. Because whether you are just getting started, you're a mid-tier operator, whether you are an enterprise powerhouse, fiat, crypto, sweepstakes, doesn't matter. We're all facing the same challenges day to day in this industry. And the aim of this webinar today is to focus on how we can overcome that, how we can take those challenges and the tools that are available and use it to really make something special when it comes to player engagement. Now, before we do that, let's kind of look at where the challenge comes in, and most importantly, why I named this webinar Beyond the First Deposit. Many people will be familiar with the basic level of what a player journey looks like initially. Marketing teams are out there fighting to acquire frequent depositing players and bring them into the site. The player turns up, they make that first deposit, and for many, that's where it's celebrated. But often that's where the challenges begin. Because once that player's made that first deposit, they will often go one of 3 routes. And that will depend on several factors. The level of engagement being one of the most difficult to navigate, but most effective when it comes to keeping the player engaged. So what do these player journeys look like? Well, the reality is 60% of players will disappear after making that first deposit. FTD churn is one of the biggest driving factors of the acquisition costs today. If we're looking at €150 CPA and you're trying to bring in 100 players, the reality is your marketing team is spending €15,000 and 70% of that budget, 60%, 70%, depending on the market, is disappearing. So what that does is it keeps your acquisition cost static, but your value per player drops, meaning a depositing high value player is now costing on average €500 to acquire. But what about those who stick around a little bit longer? Well, there's 2 routes. The more common is your everyday average Joe. The average lifespan for that player today is about 6 to 12 months. Now, that used to be enough. Today, that opens up a few more challenges. The third path, unfortunately the less walked path, is those high value frequent depositing players. On average, 10 to 15% of players will allow you to break even on your initial investment without entering a reactivation point. The reactivation point is the point where operators need to decide whether they wish to give up on a player and have marketing reinvest in bringing new players in the hopes that they are part of that 15% that would be positive, or do we spend again? Because the challenge is once a player churns, you are now having to pay twice just to try and recover the initial investment. And that is what I really want to focus on today. Because the biggest challenge right now, whether it's fiat, whether it's crypto, whether it's sweepstakes, is trying to turn CPA positive. Didn't always used to be as difficult. To give you an example of this, I'm going to use Frank as my little helper. Frank is your everyday player. He's the one that the marketing teams are pushing to try and bring through, or the one that your marketing team will most commonly bring through. Now, in 2015, Frank was looking for a new site. There was less competition, your marketing team did a great job, and you managed to pull Frank's attention in. It cost you about 120 euros. Now, if we assume Frank was on the higher end of the averages, so he stuck around for 12 months. He made 10 deposits over that time, each one equating to 40 euros. Well, we know that a 40 euro deposit isn't really 40 euros returned because we have to take into consideration tax, bonuses, winnings, and other spends depending on your country regulations. So we can assume a net hold of about 30 to 40%. So what that meant for Frank was you acquired him for 120, worst case scenario, you broke even. You might have even made a little bit of profit. And that's when you can start to relax, because you can now organically allow Frank to utilize your site. And when he goes quiet, you even have a little bit extra you can spend to reinvest. So try and bring Frank back and get a bit more value out of them. Now, the reality is, since 2015, that journey hasn't really changed. The average lifespan of a player has not changed. The average spend has increased very little. The problem operators face today is that acquisition costs have. Whether you've been around for 10 years or you're relatively recent, if we look at Western Europe, even over the last few years, we've seen 60% upwards increase in acquisition costs. And if the player value and spend is not rising at the same rate, every investment becomes a challenge. So in 2025, you've brought Frank in, but it's been more difficult. But he sticks around for 12 months. He makes his 10 deposits. He's actually spending about 60 euros on average now. But that means best case scenario is you don't break even and you lose out. Worst case scenario is you don't break even and you lose out. And that's where you reach that reactivation point. So, do we give up on Frank? Do we reinvest 250 euros and try and bring the next player in and hope they're positive? Or do we now focus on trying to get more value out of Frank with an initial second investment? Reactivation will always be the cheapest and most effective way to turn profit on the players. But it has to be done the right way. I've worked across CRMs, I've worked across platforms and multiple industries. And the one thing that always reigned true was that reactivation will only really succeed when you move beyond generic. You really have to start engaging the player on their terms. Now, there's a range of different brands joined us and operators joined us for this webinar today. And I'm sure you all have different processes and plans in place when it comes to reactivation. But there's usually two channels that will dominate how you do this. The first will be emails. And emails are fantastic. Of course they are. They are cheap. They're scalable. If done correctly, they can actually be quite personalized. Operators love them. Unfortunately, players don't. On average, we see 1 to 2% conversion. And it's because email fatigue has become such a huge element now. Your email is fighting a battlefield inside an inbox just to be seen. If you work in an office environment, the reality is every month you will receive between work and personal life about 3,000 emails. Now, I like to use analogies when I do these kind of presentations. So I want you to imagine for a second you are a footballer and you're walking off the pitch after a game. You see someone holding up a sign. It says, "You're my favorite player. Please, can I have your shirt?" You'll feel special, feel valued. So of course you're going to give that person your shirt. A week later, you're walking off the pitch again. This time there's 10 signs. They all say the same thing. Maybe slightly different fonts, maybe slightly different tones. But now as a player, you need to decide which one you're going to pick. A week later, you're walking off and there's 100 signs, all saying the same thing, all trying to get your attention. The reality is, as a player, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're not going to be able to give your shirt to anyone, and you're going to end up ignoring them all. The reality is that's how players are now perceiving emails. Everyone's saying the same thing. So if your email does not resonate with that player in the first 8 seconds of it hitting their inbox, the reality is it's probably going to fade away. So what are operators doing when email's not reaching the player? Well, they're going direct. And when it comes to direct, nothing quite compares to an SMS because it cuts through. It doesn't give you the freedom of email to review it when you want to. It goes straight to your hand there and then. The problem with an SMS is whilst it is incredibly powerful at breaking through, it's also the most intrusive way you can engage. Now, the way an SMS will work, and if you look into your day-to-day activities, whether you're watching a movie, playing with kids, working, driving, probably even during this webinar, if your phone has made a noise, regardless of whether you're engaged in those activities or not, the likelihood is you have stopped what you were doing to check what it was. Now, that's great for getting people's attention. But if that player does not feel there and then that it is high value, it's relevant, and that it was urgent, the only words they're going to read are opt-out. If you lose SMS as a channel, it is a significant loss to the way in which you can keep engaging with your players. In my experience, SMS is effective when it's rare, when it's truly personalized, and when it's high value. Now, I've said personalized about 12 times, which I'm aware, but for me, it's the foundation on which all engagements should be built upon. And because it's something I've done for so long across so many industries, I like to try and keep up to date with the trends, the surveys, the data analysis, and say, okay, well, what is the market truly saying right now? And what I've done is I've took a few of those statistics and I've pulled them through, a few of my favorites. First is 71%. It was a great survey. It's quite frequently done, I believe, by Optimove, in which they were informed 71% of players expect personalized engagements. It's not want or need or would like, it's expect. And it's not just reactivation. It's every journey the player goes on with your brand. They should feel like it was built specifically for them. Now, again, a lot of different operators here, and I imagine everyone is probably saying to themselves, well, we're okay because we do personalization. Yet 40% of operators inside this industry still offer base level personalization. And that's often due to many different factors. So technical resource, skill gaps, time. Because personalization does take time. And I've had a lot of conversations, especially early on when I joined this industry, about personalization. And too often I heard, well, we put their name in the email. That's not personalization. Personalization is understanding why a player plays, when they play, how they play, what they play. And the way in which you engage should be built around that, because then it offers true value to the player. 24%. This statistic is based not on engagement, but on what the player experiences when they're on your site. I imagine everyone here uses Netflix, Spotify, YouTube, whichever streaming service you prefer. I can't imagine many of you will sit and click down over and over again, desperately trying to find something to watch. You will go to the recommended for you section, you will pick something and you will watch it. Because those machine learning algorithms and AI are usually so accurate. So what we saw is companies like Little Adventure bringing smart lobbies, that same mentality of AI suggestion into iGaming. And in turn, what we see is players that play games that are recommended play longer. They play longer, they spend more. It's all about making sure everything feels personal. And I mentioned a word a couple of minutes ago, which was value. 68% of consumers said they stopped using a brand, not because of the product, not because of the price, because they didn't feel valued. And that's such a key element in the way in which we engage today. Because if your players don't feel value, they won't give you value. And the last statistic leads me on to the third tier when it comes to reactivation, and it's 30%. 30% plus is the LTV lift that we see when you offer personalized incentives via direct outreach. Because everyone's doing emails and everyone's doing SMS, yet there is a channel which outperforms them all, but it's only used by about 1/3 of operators, and that's the phone call. Now, when it comes to reactivation, it is significantly more impactful than email and SMS. It is better at building loyalty. It's better at building trust. So why don't more people use it? Very good reasons. It is expensive to scale. It requires a deep understanding of regulatory and compliance so you can navigate what you can say and how you can say it. It requires a huge tech resource, a large amount of time training, and as such, that usually stops operators from proceeding. They all have their strengths, they all have their weaknesses. None of these are strong enough to stand on their own. To truly overcome acquisition costs today, all three channels should be utilized to their fullest at the right time to ensure the maximum effectiveness. Now, my suggestion would always be if you can accommodate making calls in-house, you should. But the reality is 90% of operators do not have the time nor resource to do that. And this is the biggest benefit, because whilst email cannot be taken without the negatives, and SMS cannot be taken without the negatives, the phone can. By utilizing companies like Enteractive, who handle the compliance and regulation navigation, who handle the scaling and the training and time side of things, you get the benefit from the trust, the increased LTV, the higher conversion rates, and truly start to engage with each player via the channel that works for them. Now, people often hear that and think, well, surely this costs a lot. We've been using email and SMS for so long and they're so cheap, why would we now add the phone in? When we look at the statistics from last year, they tell the story. In 2024, Enteractive made 12 million interactions between operator and player. Within those 12 million interactions, we saw an average of 13% of churned players reactivated. 8% of registered non-depositing players deposited. That generated 320 million in deposits and 65 million in net gaming revenue. And we did all of that whilst offering our partners, on average, a return on investment of 360% upwards. But it's because we do it at the right time in the right way. Like I said, all three of these tools need to work in unison. So let's go back to Frank. Frank has been on the site for 12 months. He's gone quiet. We now want to try and bring him back in. The longer Frank stays inactive, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to pull him back. During that first 45 days, the likelihood of being able to reactivate a churned player is about 30 to 40%. Varies depending on market. When the likelihood is higher, you can afford to take more risk. You can go for the lower cost options. Utilize email to its fullest. Now that can be a soft touch email. So just reminding him that you're there, letting him know maybe there's a new game coming out. If that's not working, turn up the heat. Okay, now we need to start investing a bit financially in bringing Frank back. And this is where your offers come in, your matched deposits and bonuses and spins. Maybe moving towards the fear of missing out towards the end of that 45-day period. And this is where maybe the VIP points are going to disappear if Frank doesn't log in soon. But the reality is, if the emails didn't work for the first 45 days, they're probably not going to work after that. Yet operators keep trying. What you should do instead is then move into SMS, because the likelihood of Frank coming back is now about 15%, which means you need to turn up the heat and take a few more risks. Start with a transitional period. Nothing will ever sell your brand like a really good email, where it's visually appealing. Nothing will deliver the urgency like SMS. So have that link over sell. But then focus purely on the SMS side, because now it's a case of urgency. If we're talking 50, 60 days without interaction, then is there any need to tiptoe around it anymore? Be direct. If you get to 90 days, your emails have not been responded to, your SMS has not been responded to, most operators rinse and repeat that cycle. And I can give you a fine example, my own example. Whilst I've been in iGaming for 4 years, I have been a consumer for longer than I'm willing to admit on a recorded webinar. But I didn't like slots. I didn't like roulette. It was too much risk. I don't have the patience for poker, so I fell in love with blackjack. I found a site that I liked. I played for a very long time. As I get older, I lost interest a little bit. One night I was in a casino and I discovered Baccarat, a game where I have to make one choice at the beginning and then whatever happens, happens. A bit more my style. A few days later, I logged in online. The site I used didn't have Baccarat, so I stopped playing. It's been about 3 years now, and I still get the same emails and the same SMS every single week. Because the reality is that the industry is investing so heavy in machine learning, in AI, in digital channels. None of them will tell you why I stopped playing. But a 60-second phone call would have. So if you've tried all the options you have available today and it hasn't worked, pick up the phone and speak to the player. Because I could have told them why I stopped. They could have told me that they've added Baccarat, which I'd go on a limb and say they probably have. And we could have discussed how I get back on the site. The reality is, in this industry, email and SMS will get you seen. If you really want to overcome high acquisition costs and get players engaged, pick up the phone because it will get you answers. Now, a little bit quicker than I'd anticipated, which always happens. But what I'd love to do now is open the floor for any questions you may have. If I can't answer a question, I will absolutely follow up following this, but I will endeavor to try and answer as many as I can within the next 7 minutes. There is a section at the bottom where you can pop your questions. Let's move my mouse over. So we have a few here. So calling customers feels very intrusive. What's been our experience and does it vary by market? Great question. And I think this is why, probably another reason why a lot of operators don't, is they're worried about how it would appear to the player. Now, the way we work at Enteractive is it's about having a conversation. So we use native local speakers, specifically focusing on the nuances of the markets that they're contacting. They understand how they wish to be engaged. And as such, the conversations are not sales. I mean, who doesn't want to have a nice conversation with someone that speaks their language, understands the way they communicate? So a lot of the times our calls are just, hi, you haven't used us in a while, we just thought we'd check in, see how things have been going. Now, across markets, that can vary. If we look at the Nordic market, for example, they like direct, they like transparency. Whilst in Southern Europe, our calls tend to be longer. So because we're using these local agents who are so well trained and so understanding of the markets they're contacting, it never really feels intrusive. It just feels like you're having a conversation between two people. And at the end of it, they'll either deposit or they won't, but they'll feel wanted and they'll feel valued. Question there saying, can we have a recording presentation of the webinar? Of course you can. If you really want to go through my voice again for 25 minutes, that's not a problem. As soon as this ends, you receive an email, but we'll also share it just to be sure. What do I think about AI taking over interactions with the players, which is a great question, especially with the way the market is today. And I've touched on this already. I think, and I've worked with some incredible people when it comes to AI, there'll always be a place for it. It will help you to analyze the way in which you engage with the players. It will help you to probably even shape the content. What it will never really let you do is build a relationship. And the relationship is the most important thing you can have with that player. So I think utilize its strengths, but know when to pull back. I treat AI like I treat the lane assist in my car. I like the fact it's there. I'm never going to take my hands off the wheel and trust it to do all the work for me. So I've got a question here, which is, what is the best way to give you the best chance of players not putting the phone down early in the call? And of course, it happens. So the first thing we do is we learn about the brand. So we sit down with you and we understand, okay, what are your USPs? What are your preferences, your regulations, your responsible gambling processes? And the reason we do all this is because when we have these engagements, we're doing it on your behalf. So using local speaking is always the first strong point. We utilize numbers from a local area. So we make sure that the player understands that that call is as genuine as possible. And then it is just a case of, we're not diving into, you haven't used this in a while. It's about having that early, just soft open to a conversation. It's people speaking to people at the end of the day, not businesses speaking to players. And by doing that, we find that we can get into a lot more organic conversations. And from there, we steer around. There's so much training that goes into our agents, and they are fantastic at what they do for a reason. So it's probably the specialty of them, which is the reason we have so many successful calls built on the processes that we utilize today. Question here, which is, are there any geos that we do not cover, or alternatively, any geos that you see the most success? Yes, I mean, the industry changes so frequently. There are some markets that respond really well to a call, some that respond better to an SMS. There is, of course, some restriction, some geos that we don't contact. There's some that we do contact where we're limited in what we can do. It's all about adapting to the different locations. What I'd love to do is follow up with you after this and kind of share you the latest list on where we contact, where we find the most success. In regards to specific markets where we find success, I think it varies so much on the brand and the way we engage, and of course the numbers. It fluctuates quite a lot through that. There is markets where we see 30 to 40% conversion. There's markets where we see 10% conversion. It's more on how quickly we engage with the player than necessarily the market. And that's where it's about finding balance. So how quickly do you pick up the phone? You don't want to do it too quickly, because then you are potentially cutting into organic retention. You don't want to wait too long. But we've got markets where we contact them after 200 days and still manage to have these conversations and convert them. So I think it's more about, if you understand what you're selling as a brand, combined with our reach and our understanding of the markets, then we can find success in any market, really. I think we'll, because there's quite a few, which is great. And we will try and go through one more question. Like I said, any that I don't answer, I will absolutely follow up with following this. So quite a common question is, I'm already paying for CPA or rev share. What's the upside, or why would I add more to reactivate a customer? It's a great question. Probably the most one, the one I'm asked the most. When it comes to CPA and rev share, the reality is you're going to have to pay twice, because if the player doesn't reactivate, you're then having to reinvest that in a new player. So what we look at instead is, how can we integrate a solution that is smart, that is based around the operator, but also the player. And the way we do that is kind of in that structure I showed you, but during the first 90 days, utilize the tools you have available. And if that's not working, that's when they come over to Enteractive, because realistically, these are the players that you were probably not going to get the revenue back from. On top of that, our model is built on success. So you don't pay for failure. You only pay when a player deposits. So thankfully, it's not as much of a reinvestment, but as executing additional tools to pull back a percentage of the revenue that you probably wouldn't have got anyway. Fantastic. And apologies, because we're running out of time quite quickly. What I would happily do is follow up with everybody after this in regards to the questions. I will also summarize all the questions and answers into an email as well. So if you have missed any, no worries. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully everyone takes away a little something from this. My email will be shared. If you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me at any time. Thank you very much.